Saturday night, while most of Europe slept, Donald Trump made a decision that no American president has ever made. He declared economic war on 8 NATO allies, not over trade, not over defense spending, over territory. Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Germany, France, the UK, all of them waking up to tariffs, with one demand attached: hand over Greenland, or this gets worse. 15,000 people took to the streets of Nuuk on Friday. That's 1 in 4 residents of Greenland's capital, the largest protest in the island's history. Trump's response? He announced the tariffs the very next day, and then came the letter. A private message to Norway's prime minister, leaked this morning, where Trump admitted something remarkable. This isn't just about security. This isn't just about minerals. Considering your country decided not to give me the Nobel Peace Prize, I no longer feel an obligation to think purely of peace. So, what happens now? What happens when the world's most powerful military alliance realizes the threat isn't coming from Moscow, but from Washington? For 75 years, Europe trusted NATO to keep it safe. This week, that trust didn't crack. It shattered. If this already feels bigger than a single headline, that's because it is. And if you want clear, calm coverage as this unfolds in real time, consider subscribing. No panic, no spin, just what actually matters. Here's what most people don't understand about how Washington actually works. When a president wants something, really wants it, the pressure doesn't start with armies. It starts with leverage, trade deals, tariffs, access. The message is simple: play ball or pay the price. That's not a threat. That's how the game has always been played. The difference now is that Trump isn't hiding it. The timeline tells the story. January 3rd. American Special Forces capture Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro in Caracas. Within hours, the wife of Trump's deputy chief of staff posts a map of Greenland draped in the American flag. One word: soon. January 6th. The White House refuses to rule out military force against Greenland, a NATO ally. January 13th. Danish and Greenlandic ministers fly to Washington. They meet Vice President Vance and Secretary of State Rubio at the White House. The message from Trump that same day: anything less than Greenland becoming part of the United States is unacceptable. January 15th. European troops begin arriving in Greenland, Sweden, Germany, France, a military exercise called Arctic Endurance, Denmark's way of saying, we're not alone. January 17th. The protests erupt. Nuuk has never seen anything like it. Families, fishermen, teachers, 1 in 4 residents in the streets, signs reading "Hands off Greenland" and "We are not for sale." January 18th. Trump's response: tariffs, 10% starting February 1st, 25% by June, against 8 countries, until, in his words, a deal is reached for the complete and total purchase of Greenland. And that brings us to today. The European Union held an emergency meeting in Brussels this morning. They're discussing retaliation, up to $108 billion in counter-tariffs on American goods. Deutsche Bank is warning that European governments might start selling their American assets, $8 trillion worth, if this continues. Denmark has pulled out of Davos. They won't sit at the same table. And NATO? NATO is trying to figure out what it even is anymore. Here's the part no one in Brussels wants to say out loud. NATO was designed to stop the Soviet Union. Article 5, the famous promise that an attack on one is an attack on all, was written for Moscow, for tanks rolling through Eastern Europe, for missiles pointed at Berlin. No one ever wrote a plan for this. No one ever imagined a scenario where the biggest threat to a NATO member came from inside the alliance, from Washington. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen said it plainly this week. If the United States chooses to attack another NATO country militarily, everything stops, including NATO itself. She's not being dramatic, she's being accurate. But here's what European leaders aren't telling you. This crisis didn't come out of nowhere. It came from decades of neglect. Denmark's own defense minister admitted it, on the record. Quote, "We have neglected for many years to make the necessary investments in ships and aircraft to monitor our kingdom. For decades, Europe outsourced its security to Washington. They let their militaries shrink. They ignored the Arctic. They assumed America would always be there to pick up the check. Trump's two dog sleds comment, mocking Greenland's defenses, was crude. It was offensive. And it worked. Within weeks, Denmark announced $13.8 billion in new Arctic defense spending, the largest military investment in their history. Would that have happened without Trump, be honest? Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent put it bluntly on Sunday. The United States right now, we are the hottest country in the world. We are the strongest country in the world. Europeans project weakness. The U.S. projects strength. That's not diplomacy, but it might be the truth. For 75 years, NATO worked because everyone agreed on the rules. America provides the muscle, Europe provides the geography, and nobody asks too many questions. Trump is asking questions, loudly, rudely, and Europe doesn't have good answers. Now let's talk about what Greenland actually means, not the politics, the hardware. Pituffik Space Base, formerly Thule Air Force Base, 750 miles north of the Arctic Circle, the northernmost U.S. military installation on Earth. This is the only facility that can track every Russian missile launch in real time. Early warning in 60 seconds, satellite command and control, space surveillance. If Russia ever launches a nuclear strike, Pituffik is the first, and maybe only, line of defense. The U.S. has operated this base since 1951 under an agreement with Denmark. But here's the catch. It's borrowed land. And borrowed land comes with borrowed trust. Trump isn't crazy for wanting control. He's just saying what Pentagon planners have thought for decades. In a real crisis, do we want our survival depending on a handshake agreement with Copenhagen? In Nuuk, a high school teacher named Simone stopped in the freezing wind to talk to reporters. She said, Trump shows a complete lack of understanding. Greenland is for the Greenlandic people, not for Denmark to give, not for America to take. A taxi driver, an Inuit man who once hunted seals in the north with 38 dogs, put it differently. Trump thinks he is a big man. We think he is small. 85% of Greenlanders say they don't want to become American. But here's the thing most coverage ignores. They don't want to stay Danish either. The majority want independence, eventually, on their own terms. Some see Trump's pressure as a threat, others see it as leverage, a way to finally break free from Copenhagen. The question isn't whether Greenland wants change, it's who gets to decide what that change looks like. So where does this end? Scenario 1, negotiation. The tariffs are leverage. Trump gets expanded military access, maybe preferential mining rights. Europe saves face. Everyone calls it a win. Scenario 2, escalation. Europe retaliates. Trade war. Stock markets tumble. NATO fractures into competing blocs. Scenario 3, rupture. The Atlantic Alliance, built over 75 years, tested by the Cold War, expanded after 9/11, simply stops functioning. Not with a war, with a shrug. Now, if you've made it this far, you already know this story isn't going away. This is the kind of crisis that unfolds in real time, and the next 48 hours could change everything. We're tracking every move. Washington, Brussels, Nuuk, the stuff that doesn't make the headlines until it's too late. If you don't want to understand this story days late, subscribe now and turn on notifications. Because when the next move drops, legacy media will debate it. You'll already know what it means. This week didn't start a war, but it ended an illusion. For 75 years, Europe trusted that America would always be there, and America trusted that Europe would never make them choose. Now both sides are learning the hard way. Trust isn't a treaty, it's a choice, and choices have consequences. The next move is being made right now.